Awesome. Well, hello everyone and welcome to the Marketplace Risk virtual event series. My name is Andrea and I'm the Director of Events and Logistics here at Marketplace Risk. Today we welcome Christie Kim with Persona, Vishal Kapoor with Shipt, and Heidi Landenberger with Udemy. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplace and sharing economy startups successfully navigate complex risk management, trust and safety, compliance, and legal subject matter, so they can avoid distractions in order to focus on launching and growing. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to access hundreds of hours of content, including our master's program, platform, podcasts, and previous live events. And to subscribe to our newsletter, where we keep you up to date on everything, including our upcoming Sharing Economy Global Summit in London. Thanks for tuning into today's session. A couple housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be available for you to access on our website. Second, all attendees have listening capabilities only and are otherwise muted. And third, do submit your questions via the control panel. If we have time at the end, we'll answer as many as we can. If we don't get to your questions, feel free to email us at info@marketplacerisk.com and we'll get your questions answered. And now, without further ado, presenters, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining Vishal, Heidi, and I today for our fraud discussion. My name is Christie Kim. I'm the COO of Persona. Persona is an identity infrastructure startup that provides identity building blocks for any business and any use case. I'm joined here today by Vishal Kapoor from Shipt and Heidi Landenberger from Udemy. I will let each of them introduce themselves, share a bit about their background, their current role, an overview of their companies, and the context in which they fight fraud and ensure trust and safety. Let's start with you, Vishal.
Nice to be here, Christy. Thanks, Andrea. I am a director of product at Shipt. Nice to meet everybody. Shipt is a grocery delivery company, primarily grocery delivery company like Instacart or DoorDash or Uber, which are also getting into grocery deliveries now. Really, it is a three-sided marketplace where you or us as consumers, customers can place orders. There is a store, a retail store where the orders are being shipped from. So that's the second side. And the third side is the company is built on the gig economy or uses a gig workforce for fulfillment. So that's the side number 3. We call them shoppers or drivers, depending on the use case, either if they are shopping an order or if they are doing a delivery only. For example, like the DoorDash or the Uber Eats use case. I work in that vertical. The 3 groups are 3 different verticals at the company. I work in the shopper vertical, and I own one of the biggest teams that I own is shopper earnings. So every dollar that goes into our shoppers' pockets, arguably any independent contractor, any gig worker that comes and works for a company, they come for a livelihood, right? They come for it as a source of income. And so our team has the products and the systems that are responsible for dispersing money into their bank accounts, essentially into their pockets. So that is a good segue into a lot of my time is spent at the company thinking about essentially not just how do we pay them fairly and how do we pay them right and pay them such that they come and work for us versus our competitors, right? So that's one problem. That's the biggest part. But the other two parts I think about also is how do we design policies or how do we kind of build features or things in our marketplace? Things like, for example, what do you get paid if you have to return an order if it doesn't get delivered, right? What happens if you are a new shopper who is shopping for the first time? For example, what do you get paid for that situation versus things like that. So designing the marketplace, making sure that there are no policies where one policy actually kind of cannibalizes the other and we are actually losing money in the business. So policy abuse is one big part, and the other part which is of this conversation is also fraud, which is there are genuinely bad actors who may steal some other identities, etc., steal credit cards and actually try to extract money from the marketplace. So great to be here. These are some of the topics that are very close to my heart. Very, very happy and very excited to have this conversation with these other experts.
I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself now. My name is Heidi Landenberger. I've been working in fraud for close to 10 years now. I'm currently working at Udemy, which is an education marketplace. Fortunately, unlike Vishal, we are only a 2-sided marketplace where we have instructors and we have students, where instructors are uploading courses and students are purchasing them. I work primarily in fraud operations, which for my team can encompass anything from fake reviews to fraudulent purchases to potentially abusive instructors. So we kind of do a little bit of everything across both sides of our marketplace.
Great. Thank you both so much for your introductions. Playing off of that, you both play a key role in your own organizations in ensuring fraudsters and bad actors are kept out of your platform. Can you, each of you, share a bit more about how your teams are structured to support fraud prevention and trust and safety efforts? Heidi, why don't you start?
Sure. So my team sits within trust and safety. We call ourselves anti-fraud. But we sit within our trust and safety team within the organization, and there's two parts to that team. There's anti-fraud, and then there's policy. Policy, as I like to think of it, sets the rules. Anti-fraud is, the terrifying banhammer of enforcement. But we also have several structures in place to help us collaborate across the organization. In particular, we have two engineering pods that we are a part of. We have a FinRisk pod where we regularly work with and collaborate with our payments engineers to, look into financial risk and different aspects there. And we also have another engineering pod where we collaborate with our application security team to focus on fraud and abuse risks there. So very much always collaborating with engineers across the organization and always very focused on that.
And what about you, Vishal?
Yeah, for us, it's fairly similar. We have a horizontal team, and we call that as the fraud squad. So what the fraud squad does is it has participants from various functions, product obviously, but also engineering, data science. We have finance, we have trust and safety. Trust and safety team is sort of the overseer of what's happening. Finance is an overseer when they see our P&Ls go out of whack for certain lines of businesses. They help us keep that accountability. We also work with legal and communications, right? So it's sort of 7 or 8 teams are kind of involved across the board. Sometimes we have to involve design if we have to change our product to kind of introduce some more friction, for example, to stop fraud. But generally, there are about 7 or 8 teams which are constantly looking at the problems happening at the company. So it's a horizontal team. And I think one of the things that I think we can identify here is a lot of times fraud, combating fraud is actually reactionary, right? So you see some case, some policy, you go play a little bit of a whack-a-mole. So at that point, you may have to engage one part of the company versus the other, one role of the company versus the other. So that's why the team is horizontally constructed with different people.
That certainly resonates with what we see across our customers. So Vishal, the next question is for you. So when it comes to deterring bad actors, kind of actually that more maybe proactive motion, one of the most important things we've seen is to consider their motivations and the ROI of the fraud they're trying to commit. Can you share any tips on how you define bad actors and how to identify areas that are more vulnerable to fraud and abuse?
Yeah. So it's a two-part question, right? I think one part is what you're asking is, Christie, how do we identify bad actors? How do we disambiguate a good actor from a bad actor? How do we look at behavior? And then second part is, what do we do to change that behavior? Because what is in it for them, and how do we make it difficult for them to, whether this is a good use of their time or not? Like, how do we make it a bad use of their time? So so I think let me start with one example, and I think a lot of us would be able to resonate with this example just from our daily lives, right? We all shop, we all do groceries, we all go and buy things outside. Sometimes what can happen, I'll speak for myself. Me and my wife, we go to shop. It doesn't usually happen, but it's possible that I may not have my credit card on me. My wife may not have her credit card on her. So I swiped for her, she swiped for me, that this type of a thing happens. Let's just say that that is an example. That let's play with that example. So at Shipt, what happens is that the way Shipt and Instacart and a lot of these companies, the way they work is they will assign a physical card to the shoppers or the drivers. And when a shopper or a driver claims an order on there is a shopper app. And when they claim an order, the card actually gets the equivalent amount so that they can swipe the card. So let's call this a card swipe, right? So when they want to finish the transaction and do a checkout at the store, they will swipe the card. So simple enough, right? It's just like us swiping credit cards. It's the same idea, except we are loading the credit cards for the amount that the shopper has actually agreed to fulfill, right? That those orders that they have agreed to check out. So that's the amount. We are not going to fill like $5,000 of credit for a $50 order, for example, which the customer wants to be delivered, right? Just as an example. So we do that. So now what happens is that coming back to what you were saying, we see instances, and this is where it kind of gets a little bit sort of, starts to get gray. We see instances where there are orders without swipes, like orders were delivered without actually card swipes, and we see there are card swipes without any orders being delivered on the other side as well. So both things happen. So how can that happen? So what are good cases and what are bad cases, right? So swipes without orders, that can happen. As I said, I swipe for my wife swiped for me. So it's possible that, friends because these are shoppers, they kind of know each other. They may be colleagues, they may be friends, otherwise. And they may be like, I forgot my card, I'm in the store, I finished all this, I'm standing in the checkout line, what do I do? And somebody else swipes for them. So that there can be orders delivered without swipes. That's a genuine case where somebody was genuinely trying to do the work, and that happened. And then the other case is there could be a technology problem, right? We all live in an imperfect world where they might have swiped something, but somehow the orders were not associated with the swipes. And that's the other side, which is the person who swiped for the other person. They did a swipe, but there was no order in there. They had not claimed the order. So that transaction can kind of show up in both the places, if you will, right? An order was delivered without a swipe happened without an order being delivered. So that's fine. These are good actors. They meant well. But how do you know now whether somebody actually meant well or not? How do you know where somebody is swiping? Just this example, a simple example, you can probably see. How do you know where somebody is actually swiping, where they don't intend to finish the work? Especially that side, and we see that is where it starts to kind of, the gray area starts to get into fraud. How do we know who are the bad actors? And I think coming back to what you were saying, ROI, so we look at repeat offenders. I think the first line of is look at people who are doing this over and over again. There is a policy, there are rules in the system where if you swipe for somebody else because you were trying to help them out, you can actually call our customer support and file for a reimbursement, because you paid the money. So that's fair is fair, right? That's fair. So you can do that. The other thing that makes this a little more interesting, just to bring more color into this, is at the time of when you are actually shopping. Imagine you or I, right? We go and we have a to-do list. We start with a to-do list. We are like, these are the items that we want to buy. We go to the grocery store, and guess what? We wanted mozzarella cheese, and when we went to the store, they were out of that cheese. So now they have Swiss cheese, or now they have pepper jack. Fine. So we will buy that. Same scenario, out of stock happens a lot, right? At the time of shopping, where a shopper is now trying to talk to the customer and figure out, they don't have mozzarella. Is it okay if I get you Swiss or pepper jack? That's fine. But then the cost of mozzarella and Swiss and pepper jack is different. So what they swiped for versus what we put on the card versus what was actually transacted eventually, they are not exactly one-to-one. So the amounts may be different. My point is, how do we know whether some of the shoppers who are bad actors, how do we know that they are not, adding extra items for themselves and saying that the members asked for it? Like, how do you close that loop of, getting that demand in real time when the members might be busy, they might be working, they don't have time to actually have this conversation in real time. So these kind of things is where fraud versus genuine versus fraud is where we see it. And then the first line of defense is we just look at who is a repeat offender, and we fire warning shots, and we tell them that it looks like you have exceptionally high, you have exceptionally high swaps. Like the customer said that they want these items, you regularly swap them out. So there must be, and the amount that you are swiping at the end of the card is significantly higher than what the original order was for. Remember that we have some wiggle room built in there, because we know that this happens for good actors. So we have some wiggle room.
Right.
But some people might actually push that over and over again. So that's the first line of defense. And then, you fire warning shots. And then I think coming back to what is the ROI, then you slowly but surely you start building technology, meaning the substitutions that somebody wants to do, for example, right? Is that automatically suggested by the product? Can we build technology to automatically fire a message, make the member approve? It's not over a text message. It's not outside the order, but as part of the order flow. Can we actually build that? Things like that. I know I'm going at a high level, but maybe this is an identifiable problem of where there is a legitimate, where people are good actors and they are trying to do the right thing, but they were trying to work around the limitation in the system. And then where there are bad actors who use the same rules and actually just abuse them, and how do we actually make it harder for them?
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense that you're not only looking at repeat offenders, but also using, productizing actual ways to prevent them from abusing those policies. That makes sense. Right. Thank you for sharing that, Vishal.
Actually,
Heidi.
I just want to say that this is all very interesting for me, because I actually worked as an Instacart shopper for 3 or 4 months back in 2019. And I was assigned to a store where I got to see lots of different shoppers. And so I got to see people showing up and saying, hey, I forgot my card, and all these different problems coming up in that kind of a situation. So definitely is a very difficult problem to tackle, like who is good and who is bad in that circumstance.
Heidi, moving on to a question for you. Your team is focused on anti-fraud, fraud investigation, as we were talking about earlier. When it comes to recognizing fraud, where should people start and what should they prioritize?
Yeah, so this is something that I have very strong opinions about, because it's what I've focused on for pretty much my entire career at this point. Whenever it comes to recognizing fraud, for me, the most important thing is to always have somebody in the weeds, because fraud is continually evolving. They're always coming up with new ways. You implement a rule, they find a way around it. You implement some new friction, they find a way to avoid it. It's that constant battle between the two. So having somebody who is like out there doing detail work that may not necessarily be scalable, I think is super, super important. If you don't have that person, at minimum, I think you always need to be collaborating very closely with your support teams, because support teams, they see all kinds of stuff. They see the good, they see the bad. And I personally think the reason why you see in fraud such like a direct path between support and people who move into fraud eventually is because you get that broad overview and that amazing context of like good and bad all in one. And they can tell when somebody is being genuine at a certain point and when somebody is being sketchy. And as an example, I had I think about a month ago, my fraud support team actually was able to successfully identify a pretty major fraud trend for us, just because they see so many of these tickets that they're like, hey, we noticed something. And they were able to escalate that to us, and we were able to investigate at scale. And if we didn't have that collaboration set up with them, if I hadn't empowered them to always be like, hey, I'm seeing something weird, we would have potentially missed that. And once you have that, channel of people who are in the weeds, identifying patterns, finding the cool stuff, the stuff we all love to do, but then eventually have to like move away from to do the less fun stuff, you basically have to get data. That's the thing. It doesn't matter how you get it. It doesn't matter what you do. Like, you don't have a database, I get it. I didn't have one when I started at all. Like, start with a Google Doc. I recommend standardizing drop downs for different reasons and things, makes it way easier. Like, get data however you can for different things and just start tracking things. And as long as you start tracking things, you'll be able to make cases for the things that are important to you, and you'll be able to see where you need to prioritize your efforts, because you'll be able to see the volume of different issues. And whenever the business asks you really annoying questions like, tell us the ROI of us doing this fraud work, make your business case for doing this fraud work, you'll have something to say to them and be like, look, this is what we're losing for these different things. And it'll be far more satisfying than what normally happens, which is, well, we know this thing happens, but we don't track it. We don't have any numbers for it because you haven't made it easy for us to track. So feel very strongly about this.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think oh, go ahead, Vishal.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that completely resonates with me, Heidi. A couple things is we work very closely, or not even work. We hear first of all from customer support team, which is part of our, a standing part of our fraud team, because they see these issues, because shoppers or especially when things like account takeovers, for example, right? Bad actors trying to impersonate others. The first thing that happens is the calls come to them because they want to take over accounts, and so they come back and tell us that they are getting a lot of calls for this versus that. And then the second thing that you also mentioned, not just that we are trying to prioritize, right? Like solving problem A versus B, where is a bigger opportunity? But I think being from product, my genuine concern is if we do introduce some measures or some friction to fight something, does that actually make things worse? So if you don't have data to measure a baseline, like how many complaints are you getting per day? Let's just say that. If you're not measuring that, how do I know if I make change in a product? Because people are used to using the product in a certain way. There is a learning curve if you change it. How do we know that that actually doesn't make the complaints make it worse? So that's the reason why I push for data. It's less about it. A little bit of it is about obviously going after the big rocks versus the small pebbles, right? So we want to find the big opportunities. But the second thing is that we want to make sure we baseline and measure so that we don't make it worse for the large part of the audience. So completely resonates.
That makes sense. So I guess one question is, and this is very near and dear to my heart, but how do each of you verify individuals on any segment of your marketplace? How do you actually do that, and where do you do that in kind of the journey with your end users or customers? Vishal, why don't you start, and then Heidi?
Yeah, so there is obviously background checks. There is identity verification that happens right at the point of ingestion when we are acquiring, somebody in the marketplace. There's, bank account verification, because in this scenario, in the shopper scenario, they are actually looking to get paid out of for what. So there's bank account verification. There is phone number, two-factor authentication, phone number verification, address verification. Those kinds of things happen. But I think even further down the funnel, if somebody changes a phone number, if somebody changes their address, if somebody changes, their license expires, driver's license expires. For people in our case who have to drive, who do delivery only and don't do shopping, we require for them to have a driver's license, for example. If that expires, how do we make sure? I think one of the things that, Christie, I think you and I were talking about before is, how do you make sure that the person who signed up is the person that's actually doing the job? So those things are very harder. And then you need continuous. So you need a one-off, a one-time when they're getting in the system, but you also need, verification as they are doing the job, so that you make sure that you can make sure that the trust and safety part of your platform is actually is reliable and reliant to the customer. So it happens up and down through the funnel, but starts at the top and then goes down.
Heidi, anything to add?
So for us, obviously I can't give details, but we do tend to focus our verification. I'm not going to tell you who we verify or when, but we tend to focus our verification in the areas where we deem there to be the highest risk, either to ourselves or to the users. And so our focus does tend to be on our instructors, because these are people who are coming to us, and some people make this their full-time job to upload courses. And so we want to make sure not only are people who they say they are, but we want to make sure that their accounts are secure. We want to make sure that, people aren't impersonating each other, things like that. So that tends to be where we focus on all of our verification efforts for the most part. Because for us, it's the highest risk area and the biggest return on investment.
Makes sense. I think another thing that I'd be curious to hear each of you opine on is one of the biggest challenges we see for marketplaces is actually even businesses beyond marketplaces, but when managing risk is how do you balance conversion with deterring bad actors, and or with, you know, how do you deter bad actors without turning away the good ones? And so we work with a lot of customers at Persona to implement different verification flows and checks for different segments based on risk that's determined by each organization, and leveraging signals that, you know, some active, some passive. But anyway, how do you, I would love to hear each of you kind of share, how do you approach finding that balance for your businesses? Vishal, do you want to start?
I think it goes back to the ROI question. It does go back to the ROI question. So I will use the example that I used at the start, right, which is allowing. So let's look at one rule, right? One rule is that we do, for example, have some variability built when we add credit to the Shipt card, which you know customers are, which the shoppers are using to check out the orders. Let's just use that anecdote. When we do allow that, because we know that the final order that is delivered may be slightly different because some items might be substituted because they weren't available in store. It might, you know, be a few dollars up or down. So we actually have some wiggle room built in for people not to get a transaction denied. Now the question is, if we can make that tighter as we build technology, we can actually make that tighter. But the question is, at that point, we are really starting to become more and more like the big brother, right? Like it's all fully automated down to the last cent, to the last penny, right? And then, you know, we can keep building it, and everything obviously needs a significant investment, right? Like you do one, and like Heidi said, you know, somebody will find a way to kind of work around that limitation, and then you do another, and then they find a way. It's very creative how people, I'm sure all of us know here, it's very creative how people get so creative with exactly the limitations of your product, not just every other product, but just your product, how they can understand policy. And, you know, people who are genuinely invested in being bad actors, they actually do it really well, and it's kind of impressive how well. So yes, so it is sort of a, you know, it's sort of like you're always sort of playing catch up. You try to put one foot forward, and then they put one foot forward, and so on and so forth. So it's never a finished problem. But then the point is, at what point do you say that, you know, the way we do it is, again, comes back to the ROI thing, is like, it doesn't look like this is causing a significant escalation of calls, significant degradation of service quality, a significant problem in customer expectation, customer satisfaction, or even shopper satisfaction, right? When shoppers if they were standing at the checkout line, the worst thing that we could do, for example, is they were standing at the checkout line, and let's say, you know, that something changed in the order while they were shopping. And then one of the situations that can happen hypothetically is that, yes, we adjusted the amount on their card down to the penny, right? Let's say we build all that technology. But then what happens is that the systems know, but while they're at checkout, maybe the internet signal is off. Maybe the card did not get updated in real time. And now they're standing there full of a cart of, you know, 50, 60 items, and they're not able to make the swipe because guess what? It is 10 pennies under, right? The amount is 10 pennies under what? So there is a limitation as to where we want to draw that line. And look at the ROI as to how much is this really causing friction, and how much is this us basically letting the shoppers feel, in my example, letting them feel that we don't trust you at all. You have to operate the business with some level of trust, with an acceptable level of risk, with an acceptable risk tolerance, with some level of trust. If you are going to, you know, try to automate everything at the end of the day, then that might actually create these kind of extreme scenarios for a lot of good actors. And that's where we kind of draw the line. So it is as much as it is a science, there is the art after the science, which is where do we make a subjective decision, and where do we decide to automate versus just leave it to human judgment and go from there. And that is why we have a big operations team as well, because we need that human intelligence. Artificial intelligence isn't always enough. We need that human intelligence to manage the business risk when it comes to those edge cases.
100% agree. And actually, Persona, while it is a fully automated solution, we always talk about how it cannot be fully, the whole process of fraud deterrence cannot be fully automated. There is so much human judgment. But what we believe at Persona is that because every business and use case is different, it does need to be human judgment from that organization. So
yes.
It needs to be the team at Shipt, the team at Udemy who's making calls about what is acceptable and what's not, because you guys understand the business and what is that acceptable level of trust and risk that you're willing to take. Heidi, would you like to weigh in on the question about that balance?
Sure. I just want to throw out there that yes, it is incredibly stressful, especially if you have to make a swap for, say, alcohol, where the price in the app is very different from what the price in store is currently, and you get to check out and you're just like,
yes.
Please work, please bless me today.
You spend 40 minutes, 45 minutes getting to that alcohol. Now you're like, now you're in crisis. Now, like, what do I do here? Like, if I don't do it, then the customer gets mad. If I do it, then I may get stuck at the checkout. Like, what do I do here, right? So this is real.
In the checkout line, being on a call with support for like 20 minutes, being like, can you please just let me buy this? It's what they wanted.
Exactly.
Why is the price so different for alcohol?
I mean,
that's like a basic question.
There can be sales, like, and alcohol tends to be like, especially grocery stores, like the most expensive thing that you may be purchasing. And if you end up having to do a substitution, the item they may ask you to substitute is something completely different,
Got it.
Maybe wasn't even necessarily like listed originally. Things happen.
Exactly.
Life happens. But as far as it goes for like thinking about the balance of friction and trying to balance between like the manual work and the automation that you do, I always like to make sure that, you really understand the unique risks presented by each side in your marketplace, and make sure that you're applying automation and applying friction appropriately based on that. And I'm going to mention this because yes, I know this call is being hosted by Persona. But whenever it comes to, say, identity verification, I think it's very important to understand, the pros and cons of all the different methods out there. For example, a lot of people like using database lookups, you enter name, address, all that stuff. But if you have a global business, that can get really, really tricky, because not every country, not every region has a really strong established system of databases for that kind of lookup. Whatever vendor you may be using may not have a good selection. And if it's a language that is, non-Roman characters, that can also get very complicated. For example, trying to do lookups in Japanese or in Russian, different languages, different characters. So not only understanding the different sides of the marketplace, but understanding your tools and understanding their inherent limitations, and being like, maybe for this, we're going to, instead of, say, a database lookup, do an ID, because it'll be easier for us to pull the information from an ID and verify that, versus try to do a database lookup in a given geo, which is something that's very important to me, since I've worked in a number of companies with this particular problem that have been global companies, and I've run into this issue repeatedly. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that that's one area that the internet, at Persona, we really believe that there needs to be dynamism and a tailored flow based on the segment, or even like the user, right? Like that's really what we should be aspiring towards, is like people should go through different flows based on what we know about them, what the organization knows about them. But I think that international is where that plays out very clearly and very commonly, right? Because people who, as Heidi said, they're just different verification methods, and there's different levels of fidelity for each based on the geo. And it's very important, and something we've really focused on at Persona, to make sure that that is enabled, because it really is it's very exclusive if you cannot offer that in your platform and your to your end users and customers. It can become quite exclusive. Okay, so question for both of you. How do you determine what third-party tools to build, or rather, how do you determine what tech you might need, and if you're going to build that in-house or buy that? Yeah, how do you determine kind of like when you're thinking about a given use case or a given project, should you go to your end pod and say, hey, I think we need to build this in-house, or should you look to the market, try to find something third-party? Heidi, do you want to start?
But I want to know Vishal's answer. He's the product person. I want to know what he has to say. But whenever it comes for me, whenever I think about, do I want to get a third-party solution for something, or do I want to try to build it in-house? I mean, the first thing I want to figure out is, what kind of technology is out there? Where is the technology going? If you're going to bother to even consider a third party, you want to make sure that it's somebody who is going in a more progressive, more modern direction with whatever it is that they're doing, because trying to get somebody to spin up a vendor in the first place is incredibly difficult. So you don't want to spin up one that's like outdated, because then you're just going to be very sad. And then once you've evaluated that and determined, okay, this is the kind of technology that we're interested in, this is what we want to, like the direction we want to go in, then you do ask the question, can you build it in-house? And oftentimes people are like, yes or no. But there's really a third answer to that question, which is yes, but. And you'll run into this problem, I think, sometimes talking to engineering teams, especially if it's something really cool, where they're like, oh, we could totally build this in-house, but it's going to be a ton of work. We're not going to have any time for like 6 months to a year. And even then, like, we're not sure if we're still going to be able to prioritize it based on these different reasons. Like, where does it fit within our stack of priorities based on the ROI, all that other stuff. And in my experience and in my opinion, unless the answer is yes, like, yes, we can build it in-house, no but, then I think it's okay to seek a vendor. If you're getting a yes, but answer, I still I treat that as a no, generally speaking. Just my experience, it's been the better idea, just because priorities for engineering teams, y'all are always super busy. Like I understand, Vishal. I'm not trying to make you feel bad.
Yep.
So at that point, I think it's okay to seek a vendor. And whenever you're evaluating a vendor, especially as a person on a fraud team, because you're always like understaffed, you're always like trying to make the most out of everything. You want to make sure, is this vendor going to make more work for me, or are they going to make less work for me? Like, are they genuinely seeking to be a partner to me in what I am doing, or do they just want to like sell me their dashboard and then not give me my data back and try to keep me trapped essentially in their system and take all my money because they're just so cool? Like, those for me are my two main questions. And if I find a vendor who is going to be a partner for me, who I can go to and say, hey, I'm having this issue, do you have any thoughts? And have, success managers or technical account managers or people who are there and be like, okay, yeah, let's look at your account, let's look at what's going on, let's work together on this. Like, at that point, I'm like, yes, not only do we have a vendor that is helping us solve this problem, but there's this additional value that we have being added because we have more people there who are trying to help us solve this problem. So me, vendors, that's what I think.
Vishal, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think first off, I wanted to say, Heidi, everything you said completely resonates with me. And I will say this, right? Being in a position of leadership, essentially business leadership at the company, I am always, this is just a personal principle of mine, that we don't build technology, we don't launch things just because they are cool. There is always an opportunity cost of doing X because you could have done Y, right? Instead of spending the time to build X, you could have done Y. So the way, that's first things first. I mean, we evaluate vendors all the time, although it may not sound like we want to build things in-house. We actually don't. We don't care about building things just because they are, it's a good hobby project for some team. That's not what we are in it for. I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first example, just to kind of motivate what is, when will we seriously think about buying versus building, right? So this is the build versus buy question. So when do we want to buy? So one example that comes to mind, we had this at Lyft. So I was at Lyft before Shipt. So I've been in marketplaces for a little bit. At Lyft also we had identity verification, driver onboarding, those teams. One of the things that you do is when you get a let's say driver's license, a driving license, as you said, Heidi, you are trying to run that against, let's say, some database. So one thing is, we could have, before Persona, before other companies like Persona were there, because we kind of sort of had to do this in-house. Let's just say that part of it was we had to kind of do this in-house because this was a problem that we were solving every day. It really, when Lyft and Uber started, when they started ingesting because they were the models for gig workforce, they really started, a lot of this documentation was over email, if you believe it or not. It was all humans verifying, one way or the other. And then things started getting automated. And then there are companies like Persona, Checker, Fountain, like a lot of these other companies now, which have some sort of ingestion. It is, they know that this problem is a common problem, commoditized enough that multiple people need it. Therefore, it is a business, right? Which solves needs for different people. So that's the first thing, is how common is the problem. So I'll give you an example. At Lyft, I'll even take it one level down. So at Lyft, when we ingested driver's licenses, we wanted to run them against databases at the time and figure out, this was 3 or 4 years ago, and figure out whether or not these are bad actors or good actors, whether they are in a registry or something, for example. So how do we do this, right? We can do this in one of two ways. One thing is we can try to do what we call as optical character recognition, which is basically text extraction, which is you're looking at a document and you're trying to extract text out of it. There's enough machine learning, machine learning is advanced and commoditized enough that you can actually do this. There are APIs. Google has an API, Amazon has an API, where you can basically send it a PDF or a document, and it will actually give you a text back of what the fields are in the document and all of that. So it can parse that document, much like search engines parse web pages, right? Because when you search for something, they actually parse and build. They have a understanding of what that web page is, what it means. So they build a context. It's very much like that, except they are doing it on an image. As you guys know, Google Photos can do it on an image, etc., etc. So the thing was that, coming back to what you were saying, Heidi, there was an engineering team which wanted to solve this cool problem of implementing a machine learning algorithm, of actually doing this in-house. And then we as product people, we were like, Google actually already has this, and Amazon has this, AWS has this, right? They have hosted services. And by the way, their algorithms have been around for 10 years at this point, and they are training their data. So every machine learning, right? Machine learning, the irony of that is, the machines will learn what you teach them, right? So it's a game of how much you teach them, and based on what you teach them. If you teach them, I use this as a example sometimes to motivate my product managers. If it's like training a kid, right? If you teach the kid the color that a color is blue, and you only teach the kid blue, and you show the kid any color, it's probably going to identify blue because it doesn't know any other color. It's the same with machine learning. If you teach it enough, then it will actually make better predictions. So the challenge here for us was, do we build it in-house? If we build it in-house, where will we get in terms of accuracy, right? How will it be able to extract the right text? Will there be errors in the text? And then so on and so forth. And then, by the way, to actually improve that algorithm, we would have to invest time, engineering resources, put a team, continue building that. Versus Amazon and Google, for example, have these services which can get you text extracted for $0.01 per document, which is so cheap. So why do we even care? So that is one example where where we would actually use technology, off-the-shelf technology, where it just doesn't make sense to try to build the wheel all over again, because it's just so expensive to build the wheel, because it's been built and there is a very good wheel out there. So we should just buy it and we should just use it. But the other example, which is the build example, Christie, is as I told you, right? The cases where we try to sort of top off the card, what should we do about, there is fraud there, because some people are trying to substitute too many items and shop it for themselves, for example, take advantage and all of that. At that point, that is not something we can outsource. It's so deeply embedded in our technology. That is something we have to spend time and effort investing within to make our product improve, to improve our product and make those fixes within the product itself. So these are two examples. There are some problems which are very well commoditized. Actually, now the problem is even one step out, right? Which is we don't even care about all that. We just go to a persona or a checker or a fountain and just tell them you deal with all of that. We don't care about parsing anything. Just tell us whether this person is reliable or good or bad. And we don't even care about like any of the steps or building the entire funnel. But again, keep in mind that I'm talking about a time when these companies weren't that popular. They didn't have that much of a customer base. Now these companies are matured and they have their products are matured as well. So it kind of depends. Again, as Heidi was saying, right, it's a very innovative area in the sense that bad actors are innovating all the time. So you have to kind of combat that innovation with your own innovation, and that's how you kind of move the ball forward, if you will. So.
Yeah, and you'd think that the whole days of getting someone's driver's license over an email was long behind us. But it also can depend on your company's size.
That's right.
And your ability to invest in different kinds of technologies. But I just wanted to build on something that Vishal said about, whether you build something in-house or you don't, and, that whole idea of, is this something that it's the same thing that everybody does it the same, like with OCR or text extraction, or is this something that is very unique to our business that nobody else is going to understand as well as we do? That also is something very important to consider.
I totally agree. And I think that you both gave great frameworks that people can use to think about how to think about build by, and even one level deeper for their own organizations when it comes to tech for fraud prevention. Okay, last question. And then I think there are a couple questions that MRMC will share from the audience. But the last question I have for you both is, can you share one resource or one activity that you and your teams do to stay on top of the trends? We've talked a lot today about how the thing about fraud is there's always innovation. And so what do you or your teams, one thing you do to try to stay on top of the latest?
I'm going to sound really lazy when I tell you this, but one of the number one ways that I stay on top of these trends is I actually, Carice Hendricks and Brett Johnson, I used to listen to their podcast back in the day when they did a joint podcast. They now do their own podcasts. But I don't even listen to the podcasts because I just forget. They're all piled up in my queue and I'm like, I need to listen to these. I just read their LinkedIn posts at this point where they're like summarizing the different things. And I'm like, oh, I should probably look into this. That for me has been hugely helpful for a variety of different things. But yes, I feel very embarrassed to say
great
that.
Tip. No, I think that's great, Heidi. Thank you so much for sharing that. Vishal, what's one thing you or your team do?
Yeah, I think similar. So I try to keep in touch with the trends that are going on, especially for our segment. So I think one of the things is it's very, very important to listen to our customer support team because they know. And sometimes you have to figure out, and I think that's where sort of your intuition and your experience comes into picture. Sometimes you have to figure out that this small pebble has a big chance of becoming it's a ticking time bomb, and it will actually explode. It's just a matter of when, not if. So that's where your judgment comes in, where you look at all the signals objectively, and even if this is a small problem, you got to be able to anticipate that this could become a big problem and squash it right there. There is some art behind doing that, right? Behind prioritizing. It's not always stop the biggest fire. It's also try to prevent forest fires in the first place, right? There's also prevention. It's not always cure. So there is one part is that, and the second part, as Heidi mentioned, listening to fraud scenarios, etc. I actually get a lot of inspiration. I've recently started listening to fraud scenarios in Web 3.0, crypto, like how people actually do fraud there. And because things are moving there now, the next step, the next generation is all these sort of blockchain payments and all of that will probably come. It's coming to a lot of marketplaces, but these will come as well. And when it comes to payments, what are some of the fraud scenarios in those situations? How do people actually assume identity? How can they do? What are the cases possible? So a combination of reading, a combination of listening to experts, and also a combination of keeping the ears close to the ground and actually genuinely looking at the problems and making sure that you are able to identify and stay on top of this. That's what I do.
For the internal stuff, you mentioned collaborating with support. from my side, like I naturally do that just based on what my job is. And for me, the equivalent of that is really staying in touch with product and being aware of what is product doing, what is product building, what new nightmares are they dreaming up for me today, like those kinds of things, and trying to be involved and at least pay attention to what's going on so you can be like, hey, I heard you're building this new thing. I'm a little worried that it could be exploited in this way. Have you thought about that? In terms of the, can you prevent forest fires? That also is a really good idea.
We do that, by the way, Heidi. So at Shipt, we are very proactive. We are proactively seeking advice from especially our fraud and finance teams. We are, because and to put it to an example, when we do test features, we do test them internally before launching them, and we talk about them for months as we are building them. In every cross-functional meeting, we have cross-functional meetings. We invite our operations partners, we invite our customer support team, literally, the senior directors from that group to participate as part of the ideas. When we write our documents, they will sit on it and noodle on it for 2 months. It's absolutely not an afterthought for us, because we know that prevention is definitely better than cure, and we need the experts to actually weigh in their advice if they see that this could cause an asymmetric sort of payment skew in the marketplace. So we are very, very careful about that. It is very much a team sport, is what I would say, right? Ultimately, it is so much a team sport. Cannot emphasize that even more than anything else. It is basically, it takes all of us to kind of keep that, keep a lid under some of these scenarios and improve the trust and safety of the platform. So I completely agree with what you said.
That's very much the definition of goals. And, I've worked at a lot of different companies in fraud, and, the experience has been very different at each one. But, what you just described, goals, like that's I think where everybody should be working towards.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Vishal. It's a team sport. Even at a vendor, at a persona, when we live and breathe fraud and fighting fraud, and it's not just product or engineering, it's not just sales or customer success. It's actually across all of these functions. It's incredibly horizontal, so really a uniting force.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you both so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom. I think there might be a time for a question or two from the audience. I'm going to hand it back to Andrea, but Vishal and Heidi, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for sharing such great insights and thoughts with us, and strategies, tactical, actionable strategies with the group.
No, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi, so I think we have time hopefully for 1 or 2 questions. First question from the crowd. How do you handle misalignment or disagreement between cross-functional teams, especially when these teams are all key in combating fraud?
Oh,
Heidi,
Lord.
yeah, why don't you take this?
Sure, I'll take this. I'll take the really hard question that comes right out of the gate.
It sounds like you would have a better answer for this.
So when it comes to misalignment, I mean, my initial honest answer is to get comfortable with despair, which honestly is something that whenever it comes to working in fraud, I think is really, really critical. Everybody is never going to agree on these issues or how best to handle them or what best to do. And even if you do know that, yes, this is the absolute best way to go with something, there's no way everybody's going to agree with you. So get comfortable with despair. But other than that, the best way I've found to fix misalignment is a combination of 2 things. And one of those things is getting data to throw at people. Just be like, look at the data. This is what's going on. This is why you should believe what I'm saying. And the other thing is education. And as an example, I had a meeting recently where I was working with a product team, and we kept disagreeing on the best way to tackle an issue. And what ended up being the problem was that they were conflating fraud and abuse, because they aren't necessarily a fraud team. So they don't understand that abuse is inherently like a sort of mostly good person that may or may not be doing malicious stuff. Mm-hmm. And fraud is like very much malicious, very much bad intent from the get-go. And you have to handle those 2 cases differently. And because we weren't aligned on those definitions at the beginning of the discussion, we were basically talking past each other. And once we were able to align on those definitions and be like, this is what we're talking about, became way easier to get to that agreement point. So comfortable with despair, data, make sure everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. So.
Awesome. And I have one other question that someone had presented for Vishal. Do you deal with refund abuse and or also see collusion with shopper or buyers here?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that question, how much I can answer that question, but the answer to first one is yes. So as far as abuse is concerned, we will actually also pursue the really bad offenders and bad actors who, there are people that we sometimes see that will that are beyond being repeat offenders one time, they actually create multiple accounts. They keep coming back. They can, you know, get identities over and over again. It's the same person, you know, so we will actually pursue some of these cases with law enforcement. So that happens because, you know, at some point it's just like, you know, this is just somebody who's clearly not just a bad actor for our marketplace, but just a bad actor in society, right? So you should probably do something about it. The second question was, what was the second question again, Andrea? So first part was the refund abuse. What was the second part?
And or do you see collusion with shopper and buyer?
Yeah, that I can't speak too much to that, but I can't speak too much to that, but I will say that in cases in markets where we are what we call a supply constraint, meaning there is a lot of demand, but there aren't enough shoppers to do that, which means that the shoppers have the upper hand, if you think about it, right? It's you know, in that sense, the shoppers actually have a lot of power in how the marketplace, what is presented to them, what they get to work on, because they have many options. There's a lot of demand and there isn't a lot of supply. At that situation, yes, if there is, generally speaking, marketplace is generally speaking, I don't want to geek out too much, but generally speaking, you know, we operate with something called a game theoretic principle, which is everybody in and of themselves is actually in it to win it. So there is not general collusion. Generally speaking, you know, if I offer the same a job, or if I offer a bounty, just to say that between the three of us, me, Heidi, and Christie, and I keep escalating it, at some point somebody will be like, I'll take it, right? And you know, there isn't a collusion. Somebody will be like, this is good enough for me, I'll take it, I'm out. So that's generally how game theory works, and that's generally how marketplaces work. But there are situations where there aren't. If it's only the three of us, we could collude and say, okay, if somebody is willing to, you know, raise the price of this bounty, we will not, the three of us can decide we will not accept under $10 million, for example. None of us will accept, right? So we can collude and raise the price of that bounty to $10 million if that happens. And those kind of things happen in markets where we are supply constrained, where we are in undersupply, where we will see, you know, them trying to kind of force a certain behavior out of what happens in the marketplace. I can't speak too much beyond that, but the way we combat that is by actually making sure that the demand to supply ratio is actually in good balance, so that we don't have these kind of situations where the shoppers or the drivers have monopolized the marketplace. Essentially, if they have monopolized it, if they have the upper hand, then it becomes very difficult for us to, and take it to an extreme scenario. If there is only one shopper and there is like 10 orders, then we can't stop the shopper from, you know, pulling the strings, right? Because they get to decide what they want to work, what they don't want to work. If we have 10 shoppers and 10 orders, then it's a different story. Then we can kind of, you know, balance between them and divide and conquer. So simple example, but I can't speak more than that, but hopefully that kind of brings the point.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time, but I want to thank all of our presenters today and thank everyone for joining us. As a reminder, check out marketplacerisk.com to access this recording, along with hundreds of hours of content, and to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all events. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a fabulous day.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.